Hey there, come a little closer to the fire. If you were sitting here with me, you would feel how the room keeps its own kind of weather. The air is warm near the flame, cool at the edges. Candle smoke threads upward in slow ribbons, as if it is trying to remember the shape of the dark above us. And tonight, I want to tell you a darker truth, the kind that does not shout, the kind that arrives like a soft footstep on stone. It is about a queen who is not one queen, a goddess who refuses to stay in a single shape, a presence that can be a crow in the sky, a test at a doorway, a tremor in the mind before any blade is lifted. You will hear about a trinity that behaves like one mind with three faces, about warnings delivered in the rasp of wings, about kings measured by the land itself, and about a washing woman at a river ford, rinsing the future as if it were only cloth. And if that sounds like the kind of story you want to drift to, take a second to like the video and subscribe. It helps the channel more than you might think, and it means you will not miss the next quiet descent into old myths and older shadows. Now, let your shoulders loosen. Let your jaw soften, as if you are setting down something you have been carrying all day. Breathe in slowly, not forcing it, just letting the air find its way in and out and in again. The fire does not hurry. Neither do we. There is a name that moves through Irish story like a low cloud moving across a moon. The Morrigan. You may have heard her spoken of as a war goddess. That is true, in the way a tide is true. A tide is water, yes, but it is also a pull, an order, a memory of the moon. The Morrigan can be war, but she is also fate and sovereignty, and the thin seam where life turns into something else. Honestly, I have always found it strange how some divine figures feel distant, like statues you look at from below, while others feel close enough to touch you through the page. The Morrigan is close, not friendly, not cruel in any simple way, just close, like wind that finds the gap in your cloak. In the oldest telling, she is not a single outline you can trace once and keep. She comes as three. Sometimes the triad is named as Badb, Masha, and Namain. Sometimes the third name shifts, because scribes and storytellers do not always agree, and because a being like her does not always consent to be pinned down by ink. Some scholars argue that these are three separate goddesses who travel together. Others say the triad is one being, seen from three angles, the way a candle flame can be three colors if you look closely enough: pale at the base, bright in the middle, dark gold at the tip where it meets the air. We cannot be sure, not in the tidy way we might wish. But the stories behave as if the Morrigan is one consciousness, splitting itself into functions, as if she needs more than one hand to hold the world the way she holds it. Let us start with a first face, the one that is easiest to hear in the night. Bad. Her name is tied to the crow, to the battle crow, the bird that arrives when the ground is broken and the air is full of human breath and fear. In the tales, Bad can be a hooded crow riding the currents above a battlefield. She can also be a woman, gray cloaked, her eyes bright, the way wet stones are bright after rain. If you listen closely, you can almost hear her before you see her. Not because she screams, because she knows how to use silence. Imagine a field at dawn. Not a neat field with fences and sheep. A field with churned earth, with grass pressed flat, with mist floating low like a blanket that has not decided whether to lift. You can smell iron, but softened, as if the air is trying to forgive what happened here. You can hear the river in the distance, breathing steadily, indifferent and faithful. And above all that, a crow circles. One crow, or three, or a number that keeps changing when you blink. A normal crow looks for scraps. A normal crow is clever, but it is still a bird. Bad is something else. In her, the crow becomes a messenger, a judge, a witness that cannot be bribed. She does not merely watch the clash of bodies. She watches the choices inside the bodies. The moment a warrior decides to hold the line, the moment another decides to step away, the moment a leader sends someone else forward and keeps himself safe behind words. In the stories, her voice can drift across the field. To some, it sounds like encouragement, a strange lift of courage that feels like sudden warmth in the chest. To others, it is a harbinger, a cold certainty that makes their knees feel heavy, as if the earth itself is calling them down. This is why people feared her, and why they listened. Because her prophecy is rarely about a single cut, a single fall. Her prophecy is about consequence. She sees the way one battle becomes two, the way one victory turns into a kingdom that grows proud and careless, the way one defeat becomes hunger, and hunger becomes anger, and anger becomes another war. There is a kind of dread in that, but it is the calm dread of truth. Like looking at a river and knowing it will reach the sea whether you praise it or curse it. Now, the second face. Masha. If Badb is the crow above the battlefield, Macha is the ground under a king's feet. She is sovereignty, not as a title, but as a relationship. In Celtic thought, kingship was not only a matter of bloodlines, swords, or clever alliances. A king had to be in harmony with the land. The land was not property. The land was partner, witness, and judge. Some stories speak of sovereignty as a kind of sacred marriage between ruler and territory. Not a romance the way we tell romances now, but an agreement that carries breath, rain, harvest, and the well-being of a people. A king who rules unjustly does not only make enemies among humans. He makes the soil itself resist him. The fields thin. The herds fail. The rivers do not behave. It is as if the world withdraws its cooperation. This is where Macha enters, quiet as a test you did not know you were taking. She appears in stories as one who evaluates, who presses a finger against the weak place in a would-be ruler's character. Sometimes she comes as a maiden, radiant with the promise of plenty. Sometimes she comes as an old woman, asking for help, asking for food, asking for a moment of patience. You know that feeling when you think you are doing something ordinary, and later you realize it was a turning point, like choosing to answer a call, or choosing to ignore it. Macha is that feeling made into a goddess. She tests not only courage, but wisdom, not only strength, but restraint, not only ambition, but the ability to carry responsibility without letting it harden into cruelty. In the flicker of candlelight, I picture her as a presence near a threshold, a doorway of a hall, a gate on a road, a ford where the water moves quickly over stones, a place where you have to decide whether you will step forward and how. And then the third face, the one that is not a bird and not a crown, Nemain. Her name is tied to panic, to frenzy, to the mental storm that can break an army before the first spear meets the first shield. This is a kind of power that does not leave blood on its hands, but leaves emptiness behind the eyes. Nemain does not need to strike. She needs to lean close. She needs to whisper into the gaps between heartbeats. She turns certainty into doubt. She turns discipline into scattered motion. She turns a leader's mind into a room full of smoke where the exits are hard to find. And if that sounds cruel, remember, in these myths, war itself is not clean. The Morrigan does not invent it. She moves within it. She becomes its language. So when the stories say she is threefold, consider what that means. Bod watches and foretells. Macha legitimizes and withdraws legitimacy. Nemain shakes the mind until it reveals what it truly is. Three functions, one pressure, a single intelligence moving through conflict the way water moves through a landscape, finding the low places, carving channels over time. Now, listen. There is also the name itself. Morrigan, often explained as Great Queen, a title that sits heavy and cold like a bronze torque. But there is another shade to it, a possibility some have traced through language and scribal variation. The idea of Phantom Queen. A queen who is not only great, but ghostly, able to step between the visible and invisible worlds. It is debated. It is not a neat certainty. Yet the feeling of the stories supports it, because she arrives as if she has been there all along. She appears and disappears. She is present in the crucial moments, then gone, leaving only a feather, a footprint, a ripple in water. If you were standing with me in a museum, looking at an old manuscript behind glass, you would see her name written in careful strokes, and you might notice the dust that settles everywhere, even on sacred things. Dust is patient. Time is patient. Names survive the way stones survive, not by staying loud, but by staying. So let us sink deeper, softly, into the world that held her. Ireland, in the old mythic imagination, is not only an island. It is a layered place. A place where the ordinary field has an other world under it, where a hill can be a doorway, where a river can be a boundary between life and death, between this world and the next. The Morrigan is woven into that landscape early. The texts that survived, copied and recopied, place her among the Tuatha De Danann, the people of the goddess Danu, the divine race that comes to Ireland in mist and fire, claiming it, shaping it, defending it. She is not introduced as a newcomer. She is already there, already potent, already connected to the rules of the land. Her genealogy is recorded with a kind of respect usually reserved for kings, because in these traditions, bloodlines and power are braided together. She is often said to be a daughter of Ernmas, a powerful mother figure. and sistered with other war goddesses, forming a triad that is less like a family and more like a council of conflict, a council of what happens when order meets the wild edge of chaos. And this is important, because her power is not only personal, it is structural. She participates in the shaping of boundaries, of sacred sites, of those thin places where worlds touch. Imagine a hill at dusk. Mist lies in the hollows. The grass is damp. You can hear a distant bird, and you cannot tell whether it is ordinary or an omen. The stones on the hill feel old, older than the names we give them. And somewhere nearby, water moves. This is the kind of place where the Morrigan would be felt. Not necessarily seen. Felt like pressure in the air, like the sense that the land is listening. And now, before we go into the great heroes and the famous confrontations, I want you to rest here for a moment, because the story is old, and it moves slowly when you let it. Breathe in, breathe out. Let the fire crackle once, then settle. Let your thoughts drift like smoke, thinning, rising, dissolving. In part 2, we will move closer to her first and most iconic mask, the battle crow. We will let her circle above the field and speak in that voice that is not merely sound, but verdict. And we will begin to feel how prophecy, in her hands, is not a threat. It is a map drawn in shadow and feather, leading us onward, gently, into the next dark room of the tale. Before you fall too far into sleep, let me place a few small objects on the table of your imagination, the way you might set down pebbles you found in your pocket. A feather, black and glossy, catching candlelight along its edge. A cup of milk offered in a moment of exhaustion, sweet on the tongue, strangely warming. A ford where the water runs quick and clear over stones, and where someone kneels, washing something that does not yet feel like it belongs to the past. These are not decorations. They are the doorways we will use. Because the Morrigan is not only a voice above battle, she is also a force that shaped the earliest struggles of the gods in Ireland. When the Tuatha De Danann fought to hold the island against older, rougher powers, the Fomorians, who arrive in the stories like weather that wants to undo the world. When those battles are spoken of, the air in the tale changes. It becomes more ancient. The sky feels lower. Even the sea seems to listen. The Morrigan's gift is that she sees the long line, not only the single moment. She knows that a victory can rot into arrogance. She knows that a defeat can harden into purpose. She knows that the land remembers everything, storing it in mud and river silt, in the hush of stone circles, in the quiet of bog water where secrets keep themselves. And I want you to feel that, gently, without fear. Just the steady awareness that time is deep, and stories are one way humans learned to breathe inside that depth. So, settle your thoughts again. Let the candlelight soften your eyelids. Let the fire be the only busy thing in the room. We are going to follow the sound of wings next. We are going to listen for prophecy the way you listen for rain on a roof. And when the crow calls, it will not be to frighten you. It will be to guide you, slowly, into the next chamber of the myth. The room is still here. The fire keeps breathing. And somewhere beyond these walls, in the vast dark that holds every old story, wings fold and unfold. If you were standing with me outside, you would hear how quiet a countryside can become when night is settled in. Not empty, quiet. Living quiet. A far-off dog. A branch shifting in the wind. The faintest rush of water in a ditch. Ireland in the stories is full of that kind of sound. The kind you notice only when you have stopped trying to fill the silence. And in that silence, the Morrigan often arrives first as a bird. Not as a gentle songbird, as a crow, or a raven, or a shape so dark against the sky that your eyes do not quite hold it. Bad. You can think of her as the edge of battle, but also as the witness of what battle reveals. Because war, in myth, is never only about winning. It is about showing who a person really is when comfort falls away. I want to take you, slowly, to the kind of place where a hero might meet her. A ford. A river narrowing where stones rise close to the surface. Water running fast, making its own music. A steady shush and clatter like beads poured over clay. The air cooler there, damp and metallic. Mist lifting in thin veils, as if the river is exhaling. Fords are simple things, and yet they are also thresholds. You step into water, and you are not fully in the old place anymore. You step out, and you are not fully the same. It makes sense that the Morrigan loves such places, and it makes sense that one of her most famous meetings happens at a ford, with a young warrior who is already becoming a story inside his own lifetime. Tulane. He is the defender of Ulster, the one who stands when others cannot, because of a curse that leaves the men of the province weak at the worst possible moment. In the great cattle raid, a vast host moves against Ulster, and the balance is wrong. Too many enemies. Too much pressure. A single figure holding a line that looks impossible. You know that feeling when you look at a task and your body tightens, because your mind knows it is too much. That is the feeling the tale carries, even before the first challenge is issued. Tulane stands near the ford. He can hear the army somewhere behind the hills, like distant surf. He can smell sweat and leather and iron carried on the wind. He can feel the pull of duty in his chest, heavier than any shield. And then a woman approaches. At first, she looks like a maiden, radiant and composed, as if the mud and strain of war cannot touch her. Her clothing catches the light in a way that feels out of place. A soft shimmer, like moonlight on water. Her eyes do not blink too often. Her voice is calm. She offers herself to him. Not merely companionship, but alliance. A kind of joining that would bring herds, lands, protection, a widening of his world. It is tempting, and the story does not pretend it is not. Offers like that appear in myths because humans understand what it is to be tired, to be lonely, to want a hand placed gently on your shoulder. But Tulane, in this moment, refuse. His refusal is blunt. He has no time, he says. No room. Ulster is at stake. There is pride in him. There is focus. There is also suspicion, the kind learned by anyone trained to survive in a world where gifts often come with strings. The maiden's face changes, subtly, like a cloud passing over the moon. Not rage, not tears, just a shift in temperature. And then, in the story, she becomes what she truly is. Her body seems to loosen its hold on human shape, like water deciding it will no longer pretend to be still, like smoke gathering itself into a new pattern. Feathers, a sleek black form, a crow, larger than a normal crow, its wings carrying a shadow that feels heavier than its weight should allow. Bad perches nearby, and she speaks, not as a girl, but as something older. Her voice is the rasp of a bird, but it carries meaning that reaches past sound. She warns him. She tells him that his path is not only lined with victories, that the battles he wins will call larger battles to him, that his own strength will attract tests that are not fair, because myths rarely care about fairness the way tired humans do. She describes wounds he will carry, moments when the river will run cold around his legs, the day when his body, so fierce and young, will finally feel the weight of everything it has refused to set down. Her prophecy is not spoken like a threat. It is spoken like weather, like a tide chart, like someone telling you the sun will set. Cuchulainn does not bow his head. He does not beg. He does what heroes do in these tales. He argues with fate. He tells her he will meet what comes. He tells her he will not be guided by fear. He tells her, in so many words, that he will remain his own. And Bab listens. I imagine she tilts her head the way crows do, as if she is considering the shape of his mind. Then she lifts into the air, and the sound of her wings is not loud, but it is final, like a door closing softly. Now, here is something important. The Morrigan does not vanish after that. She returns, because her interest in a hero is not a single glance. It is an ongoing evaluation, like Matcha testing sovereignty, like Namain testing the mind. The cattle raid continues, and the days blur into each other, the way days blur when you are exhausted. Duels at the ford. Small moments of rest that feel like miracles. Cuts and bruises that are never described too closely in the old stories. Because the point is not gore. The point is the strain. The point is what a person becomes under strain. At one point, when Cuchulainn is worn down, when his body is full of aches and the air itself feels heavy, an old woman approaches. A hug, bent with age, her hair thin as dried grass, her hands knotted, but steady. She carries a cow, or she leads one, and she offers him milk. It is such a simple offering. A cup, a moment of nourishment, the kind of thing any traveler might accept with gratitude. And he does. He drinks. You can almost feel it, the way warmth spreads through the chest, the way the throat relaxes, the way a little strength returns. He is polite to her, because he was raised to respect elders, because even in battle, there are rules that keep a person human. And the milk does something else. It restores him more than it should. Not like a lightning bolt, like steady healing, like water finding cracks in dry ground. Then the old woman straightens. Age falls away like a cloak. The room of the story shifts, as if the wind has turned. It is the Morrigan again. And now the hero understands that even kindness can be a test, that accepting help from the divine creates a bond, whether you asked for it or not. She tells him, calmly, that the gift was real, and that gifts have consequences. Not punishment, not bargaining in a market. Just consequence. The same way a stone dropped in water makes ripples. This is where the relationship between them becomes truly strange. Not romance, not hatred, something that slides between those categories and refuses to settle. She challenges him, yes, but she also watches him with a kind of attention that feels almost like respect. Then come the forms. The stories speak of her taking shapes that interfere with him, that test him, that press on him when he is already at the edge. A red heifer, charging into the field, not random, not mindless. A surge of animal force shaped by divine intention. An eel in the river, wrapping around his legs as he crosses, pulling him into the cold grip of the current. Water in your ears, breath tightening, hands searching for purchase on slick stones. The river still breathing, indifferent and close. A gray wolf, appearing at the worst moment, moving with intelligence that makes it feel less like an animal and more like strategy. Teeth, yes, but also timing. Pressure. The sense of being watched from more than one angle. He responds the way he always responds. With adaptation. With stubborn calm. With a refusal to be unmade by what is trying to unmake him. He does not win because the world is kind. He wins because he learns. He changes his footing. He uses the river instead of fighting it. He steps to the side instead of meeting a charge straight on. He makes the chaos of an encounter into something he can understand. And each time, the Morrigan withdraws, not defeated exactly, but satisfied in some deeper way, as if the test was not about her dominance, but about his shape. Because heroes in Celtic story are not admired for comfort. They are admired for what they endure without losing themselves. Still, the Morrigan never lets him forget the prophecy. She does not need to repeat it loudly. She lets it sit behind his victories like a shadow behind a candle flame. This is the quiet tragedy that runs through their encounters. He is brilliant. He is brave. He is young. And the Morrigan, who sees farther than a human can, knows the shape of the end. She knows that heroism is expensive. She knows that a life lived at that height does not end softly. So her presence becomes a kind of conversation between fate and will. She offers. He refuses. She warns. He shrugs. She tests. He adapts. She heals. He accepts, then regrets, then carries the bond anyway. And always, there is the river. Always, there is water as boundary. Always, there is the hush of stone and the patience of mud. Always, there is a bird somewhere, watching. Now let me bring in another of her most haunting masks. the one that belongs to the Fords, but in a different way. The washing woman. In some traditions, she appears at the edge of a stream, kneeling, washing armor, or washing a weapon, or washing cloth that looks like it has been carried through too many nights. The act is simple, and that is what makes it unsettling. She does not rush. She scrubs as if she has all the time in the world. Water runs over metal. The sound is soft. Your breath catches, not from fear, but from recognition, because the washing is a sign. Someone is marked. Someone will not return the same way they came. There are stories where a person who sees her and understands is granted a moment of choice, not to escape fate, but to meet it with dignity, to arrange words that need to be said, to lay down burdens, even if only in the mind. Other stories warn that arrogance at such a moment hardens the path, that mocking the washing woman, or trying to deny what she represents, brings a heavier consequence. Again, it is not about cruelty. It is about the law of transition. The river will take what it takes. The day will end when it ends. The Morrigan, in this form, is simply the one who prepares the crossing. If you were standing there, you might smell wet iron and river silt. You might notice the candlelight of the moon on the water. You might hear, very faintly, wings overhead. And you might feel, for a moment, how thin the world can become. Take a breath now. Slow and easy. Let your mind rest on the sound of water. Let it carry away whatever it wants to carry away. Because in part 3, we will widen the view. We will step back from the single hero at the ford and look at the Morrigan as the judge of kings and kingdoms. We will move toward Samhain, when the veil is thin, and we will meet the Dagda by the river, where their union renews the land and sharpens the coming year, and the crow will still be there, somewhere in the dark, quiet, patient, waiting for the next ripple. Some listeners ask, quietly, whether the Morrigan wanted Cuchulainn to fall, or whether she wanted him to rise. It is hard to answer, because she is not built like a human heart. She is built like a season. A season does not hate the leaf that drops. A season does not love the seed that sprouts. A season enforces the cycle, and within that enforcement there can still be a kind of tenderness. The tenderness of inevitability. When she appears as Bab, she speaks the language of aftermath. When she appears as Masha, she speaks the language of legitimacy and the land's consent. When she appears as Nemain, she is the hush before a shout, the sudden blankness in a mind that thought it was steady. And maybe that is why her encounters feel so intimate, because she does not only touch the battlefield, she touches the inside of a person. Even if you have never held a spear, you know what it is to stand at a threshold. You know what it is to feel tested by an offer that seems generous. You know what it is to sense panic rising and to breathe through it, one slow breath at a time. That is the strange comfort hidden inside these dark myths. They tell us the world is not always kind, but it is patterned, and if you can feel the pattern, you can relax inside it, the way you relax into the steady rhythm of rain. So, let the story hold you. Let the river sound fade into the background like white noise. Let the crow become only a silhouette, soft and distant. We are not hurrying. We are drifting onward as the fire lowers and the candles shorten toward the next chapter of her power. The fire has sunk a little lower and the candles have shortened, and yet the room feels wider now, as if the story itself has opened a door. If you were standing here with me, you would hear the smallest sounds that usually get ignored. The soft tick of settling wood, the faint scratch of a wick as it drinks melted wax. Even our breathing becomes part of the scene, slow and steady, like a river heard from far away. In the last part, we stayed close to one hero at one ford, and we watched the Morrigan shift through forms like a thought-changing shape. Now I want to step back, gently, and show you how she moves through something larger than a single duel. Because the Morrigan is not only the one who meets warriors, she is also the one who measures kings. And, in the oldest rhythm of the tales, she measures them with the land. Celtic sovereignty is a strange thing to modern ears. We often imagine a crown as an object, a law, a family claim. But in the old Irish imagination, kingship is almost like weather. It happens through relationship. It happens when the land agrees. A ruler who is clever but careless can still be refused. A ruler who is strong but unjust can still be opposed, not only by people, but by the ground itself, by the fertility of fields, by the mood of rivers, by the way a harvest comes in thin and tired, like it has lost interest. It is a quiet kind of judgment. No thunderbolt, no dramatic courtroom, just the slow withdrawal of support from the things that sustain life. This is why matcha matters so much. This is why the Morrigan, in her sovereignty aspect, can be more frightening than any weapon, because a sword ends a moment. A refusal from the land can end an era. If you were walking with me through a museum hush, past glass cases holding old rings and brooches, you might notice how small the objects are. A pin no longer than a finger. A torque that looks heavy but would rest lightly on a neck. And beside them, in careful letters, the names Bad, Masha, Namain, the Morrigan. Dust clings even to the labels. Dust, like time, does not pick sides. It only settles. Now imagine the opposite of the museum. Imagine the mythic world itself, where objects are not in cases, but in use, where rivers are not lines on maps, but living boundaries, and the land is listening. The Morrigan appears to potential rulers in many guises. It is said she might come as a young woman whose beauty is almost too perfect, the kind of beauty that makes you uneasy, because it feels designed. Or she might come as an old woman, plain and bent, asking for a small kindness. The test is rarely announced. A king might meet her on a road at dusk, his horse sweating, his cloak damp with mist. He might see a woman at the edge of a field, barefoot, as if the cold does not touch her. She asks for a drink, or for shelter, or simply for a moment of respect. If he laughs, if he refuses, if he treats her as disposable, the story says the land will learn from that moment. The land will mirror his contempt. His reign will thin, like cloth worn too long. If he gives what is asked, not because it earns him applause, but because it is right, the land will respond with ease. The rains arrive in time. The cattle grow sleek. The people sleep without grinding their teeth in the night. And yet, it is never as simple as reward and punishment. The Morrigan is not a vending machine of blessings. She is a force that protects balance. She tests for fitness, and fitness includes the ability to carry power without letting it rot into arrogance. So the Morrigan stands at the hinge of rise and fall. The great queen, the phantom queen, the one who knows that kingdoms are temporary and that the land outlasts them all. This is why she is so closely tied to Samhain. Samhain is the turning of the year, the dark threshold, the time when the old season dies and the new season is not yet born. The time when the veil between worlds is thin enough that you might feel your own thoughts echo, as if someone else is listening from the other side. In the stories, Samhain is not only a festival, it is a hinge in reality. The Morrigan's union with the Dagda is said to happen at that hinge. Let us go there together. Slowly, picture a riverbank, not bright and cheerful, but dim with late autumn light. The sky is low. The air smells like wet leaves and wood smoke. The river moves with that steady, patient breath that never stops, even when everything else feels uncertain. Some sources name the river as the Unius or Unshin, and like many names in old tradition, it shifts depending on the teller. But the feeling remains the same, a sacred waterway, a liminal boundary, a place where power can be exchanged. The Dagda comes first, sometimes a great figure in the Tuatha De Danann, a fatherly force, heavy with strength and fertility. He is not delicate. He is the kind of god whose presence makes the ground feel more solid, as if the world remembers how to hold weight. He arrives with gifts, not as bribes, but as symbols: food, drink, the promise of plenty. Even in myth, people understand that abundance is not automatic. It requires tending. It requires respect. Then the Morrigan arrives, not always in the same form. Sometimes she comes as the crow, wings dark against the dim sky, circling above the river as if she is measuring the current with her eyes. Sometimes she comes as a woman, and the air around her feels colder, sharper, as if the world is paying attention. There is something both intimate and cosmic about their meeting. A union of fertility and war. A joining of protection and destruction. A reminder that growth and loss are not enemies, but partners in the same cycle. This is one of the places where the Morrigan's darkness becomes strangely soothing, because her darkness is not random cruelty. It is the dark of soil where seeds wait. It is the dark of winter, where life hides and gathers itself. When she meets the Dagda by the river, it is said they exchange more than affection. They exchange knowledge. They align their wills for the coming year. They renew the spiritual defenses of the land. If you were standing there, you might not see fireworks. You might see only mist, moving in slow curls, and grass bending under a colder wind. But you would feel the difference, as if Ireland itself had been tuned, like an instrument tightened and made ready. And the timing matters, because the Tuatha De Danann are not alone in Ireland. There are older forces, rougher forces, the Fomorians, often described as beings of chaos, of destruction, of sea and shadow. It is debated how literally to take them. Some scholars interpret them as mythic representations of natural threat, storm, famine, the harshness of coastal life, the fear of invasion. Others treat them as a divine race with their own politics and their own terrible dignity. Either way, they are the pressure that makes the Tuatha De Danann sharpen their defenses. In the great conflicts of the mythic cycle, the Morrigan is not only a spectator. She is an active strategist. She has prophecy, and prophecy, in her hands, is not a parlor trick. It is intelligence. It is preparation. During the battles that decide Ireland's fate, she is said to use fog and illusion not as childish magic, but as battlefield craft. A sudden mist that hides a movement, a phantom sound that pulls an enemy line out of shape, a cry that makes confidence wobble. Not loud, effective. Think of the way a simple doubt can unravel a plan. Think of the way one wrong step on whetstone can make a strong person fall. The Morrigan works in those margins. And always, she watches the long consequences. The battles of Mag Tuired, the great confrontations between the Tuatha De Danann and their opponents, are the kind of mythic events that feel like tectonic shifts. Not a single skirmish, but a reshaping of the island's spiritual order. Before the second battle, the air is said to be heavy with omen. Crows gathering, water behaving strangely, a hush that feels like a held breath. The Morrigan appears in the preparations, offering counsel, making bargains, delivering warnings. She is not sentimental. She does not promise safety. She promises clarity. And that is sometimes the harder gift. Because clarity means seeing what must be sacrificed. In some accounts, she moves through the camp in disguise. A woman carrying a bundle. A figure by the fire. A shadow at the edge of hearing. She listens to the leaders, to the heroes, to the ones who want glory. She measures them, not for charm, for steadiness, for the ability to endure the cost of doing what must be done. Then she goes to the river, because she always returns to water, to boundary, to the place where decisions become irreversible. I like to imagine her kneeling at the edge of the current, letting cold water run over her hands, not washing away fear, but making it manageable, the way you might rinse your face in the night and feel your mind become clearer for a moment. She speaks to the land, not in human words, maybe in presence, in attention, in the same way a crow speaks, not by explaining, but by calling. And the land listens, because she is of the land as much as she is of war. Here is a quiet truth hidden inside the grandeur of these stories. Even gods in these tales are not omnipotent. They plan. They gather. They worry. They need alliances. They need timing. The Morrigan is valuable because she understands timing. She understands that a battle is not only decided by strength, but by the moment strength is applied. She understands that chaos can be met, not by constant force, but by the right force at the right time. So she becomes the one who stands at the edge of the conflict, watching, adjusting, guiding. And when the battle finally arrives, she will not be only in one place. She will be above, as crow, beside, as whisper, within, as the trembling of courage turning into action. Hold that image gently. Not the violence, but the structure. The sense of a world where choices matter, where the land is not passive, where sovereignty is not a title but a living relationship. And now, as the fire continues to soften, let me leave you with the river again, because the river is where part 4 begins. We will step into the second battle of Mag Tuerd, not as a rush of noise, but as a slow unfolding. We will meet the Morrigan in her most mythic scale, offering prophecy after the fighting, speaking of future ages, of rise and decline, of how order is never permanent. And we will watch her begin the long transformation from goddess to omen, from divine strategist to the shadow that lingers at a ford, washing what must be washed. For now, breathe. Let your mind settle like silt in calm water. The story is still moving, quietly, toward the next bend in the river. Before we leave this sovereign side of her, there is one more quiet detail I always return to. Names. The Morrigan's name has been explained in more than one way, and the explanations themselves feel like her. Sliding, multi-faced, true in different lights. Some trace it to a meaning like Great Queen, a title of authority so old it feels like it comes from the bones of language. Others hear Phantom Queen, a queen of the borderlands, someone who can appear and vanish, who is never fully pinned to one place. We cannot be sure which interpretation is closest to the earliest tongue. Languages move the way rivers move, carrying silt, changing course, leaving old channels behind. Still, the debate itself is a kind of evidence. People felt that her name held more than one truth, and her threefold nature mirrors that. 2. Bad as the battle crow, Matcha as sovereignty, Nemain as the mind's unraveling. 3 ways of saying war is not only bodies. War is land. War is psyche. Sometimes storytellers treat them as sisters, sometimes as one being seen from 3 angles. I have always found it strange and quietly beautiful that the tradition allows both. It is as if the myth refuses to trap her in a single category. If you listen closely to old myth, it often refuses categories. It prefers patterns. A crow circling, a river crossing, a door opening, a choice made and remembered by the ground. So when you imagine the Morrigan beside the Dagda at Salmon, you can let the scene be simple. A river, mist, a meeting, and you can also sense the long chain behind it, like footsteps in damp earth, one after another, fading into deep time. 1,000 Samhains, 10,000. Each year the same turning. Each year the same quiet agreement life will continue, but not without cost, not without balance. The Morrigan does not erase the cost. She makes it bearable by giving it shape. And that is why, when the battle finally comes, and the mists of Magtuired thicken, it will not feel like a random storm. It will feel like the natural consequence of a cycle that has been turning for a long, long time. Stay with that calm. The river does not hurry. Neither do we. The river is closer now, not as a place you visit, but as a sound that lives inside the story. If you were beside me, you might notice how the mind begins to drift when it listens to water. A steady current is like a lullaby that does not need words. It makes everything else feel less urgent. Even conflict, in the old tales, can be held at a distance when the river keeps breathing. This is a helpful thing to remember as we step into the second battle of Mag-Tuired. Because in the mythic cycle, this battle is not only a fight, it is a decision about what kind of world will continue. Order and chaos. Yes, but also something simpler and more human, whether a land can be held, whether a people can remain themselves, whether the future will be shaped by craft and community, or by hunger and storm. The Morrigan moves through this moment like a dark wind that knows where every crack in a wall is. We do not need to picture every strike. We do not need to count every fall. The stories themselves do not ask us to savor pain. They ask us to feel the weight of turning points. So let us enter the battlefield softly. Imagine morning light that looks bruised by cloud, a damp cold that sits in clothing, grass flattened by many feet, the smell of wet earth, and smoke, and metal, but all blurred by mist. Somewhere in that mist, crows are already awake, not because they love destruction, but because they are part of the cycle that follows it. The Morrigan's crow aspect is like that. It arrives where the world is changing. It observes the shift. It announces what is already moving. The Tuatha De Danann gather with their leaders, their champions, their crafts and spells. They are not just warriors. They are a divine people with skills that feel like the roots of civilization itself. Healing, poetry, smithing, law, the ability to organize life so it does not collapse into fear. Across from them are the Fomorians, the sea-born pressure, the older roughness, the storm that does not negotiate. They are described in many ways monstrous, foreign, chaotic, sometimes even tragic, because chaos is not always evil. It is simply indifferent to what fragile beings need. It is debated how much of this is symbol and how much is literal mythic history. But the emotional truth holds. A land can be threatened by forces that do not care about its gardens. A people can be challenged by powers that prefer the raw sea to the built hearth. So the battle comes, and the Morrigan participates first with what she does best, shaping minds. Nemain, the panic aspect, moves at the edge of perception. A sudden distortion in sound. A moment when the air seems to vibrate, and a line that looked steady begins to sway. Have you ever had a moment when you were sure of yourself, and then, without reason, doubt arrived, and your body forgot its rhythm that is Nemain? Not a scream, but a slipping. Then Badb, the crow, turns and circles. The shadows of wings cross faces. A call cuts through the mist, and some hear it as command, while others hear it as warning. And Masha, the sovereignty force, is present too, not with speeches, but with consequence. The land itself is involved. The ground can feel firm or treacherous. The river can be a boundary that favors one crossing and resists another. The weather can tilt slightly, not in obvious miracles, but in subtle advantages that only matter when everything is balanced on a knife edge. The Morrigan does not need to throw lightning. She uses the world. Fog is one of her tools in these stories. Not a fog that looks like stage smoke, but a living mist that moves with intention. It gathers in the wrong place for an enemy. It thins at the right moment for an ally. It makes distance hard to judge. It makes confidence fragile. Sound is another tool. A cry that is more than noise. A rhythm that makes the heart beat faster or slower. A sudden hush that makes even a seasoned fighter feel alone. And then there is her presence as Psychop, guide of souls. This is one of her darkest duties, and also one of her most sacred. When death approaches in the story, she is there to catch what would otherwise drift, to guide, to judge, to prevent spirits from becoming lost in the borderland between worlds. It is not a grim reaping. It is a kind of escort. A hand at the elbow in a doorway. A lantern in the fog. So the battle unfolds, and it reaches its decisive encounters. The champions meeting. The high stakes compressing into a few moments that decide many years. One of the most famous figures on the Fomorian side is Balor, the destructive gaze, the force that can ruin what it looks upon. He is a symbol of catastrophic power, the kind that does not need to argue, because it simply overwhelms. The Tuatha De Danann answer with Lug, the many-skilled, the bright intelligence that can adapt. In some tellings, Lug is connected to the Morrigan not as lover, but as ally of necessity, because war in myth is always coalition. Even gods need each other. The details of the decisive moment vary across sources, as old stories often do. We cannot be sure of a single script, but the pattern is clear. The chaos power is confronted, not by brute force alone, but by skill, timing, and a refusal to be paralyzed. This is where the Morrigan's influence feels like a deep undercurrent, not the hero doing the final act, but the conditions that make the act possible. The clarity, the omen, the alignment of land, mind, and moment. When the turning finally happens, the battle begins to loosen, like a storm losing its center. The pressure shifts. The surviving forces understand, even before anyone announces it, that the balance has changed. And this is when the Morrigan does something that reveals her scale. After the fighting, she speaks. She stands, in some accounts, by water again, because water is where prophecy sounds most natural. It carries. It echoes. It feels older than the voice speaking. She delivers a post-battle prophecy that is not only a celebration, it is a map of future ages. She speaks of Ireland's fate, not as a smooth rise into peace, but as a cycle, as growth and decay, as kingdoms that will flourish and then thin, as heroes who will appear and then vanish into the same deep time that swallowed the gods. She praises, yes, but she also warns, because warning is part of care, even when it is sharp. The victory over chaos does not eliminate chaos forever. It only pushes it back. It only buys time. This is the truth that makes her both frightening and strangely comforting. She does not lie about permanence. She does not promise that a triumph lasts. She tells you that everything is temporary, and that understanding this can help you hold life with softer hands. In the stories, her prophecy includes visions of great kings and noble acts, but also of decline, of complacency, of people forgetting the spiritual agreements that keep a land healthy, of leaders choosing cleverness over honor, of the slow decay that arrives when a society forgets what it took to survive its earlier darkness. It is a heavy vision, but she delivers it without hysteria. More like a weather report. More like a tide table. More like someone speaking gently at your bedside, saying, "This is how the world works," and you can still sleep. Because sleep is not denial. Sleep is the body trusting that the dark can be held. Now, the Morrigan does not remain fixed as a battlefield strategist forever in the cultural imagination. Time changes how people hold their gods. As centuries pass, the Tuatha De Danann withdraw into the other world, into the Sidhe mounds, into the places where fog gathers and the grass grows strangely green in winter. Their stories do not vanish, but they change texture. They become folklore. They become whispers. And the Morrigan changes too. She does not stop existing in the tales. She becomes less like a person you could meet and more like a sign you might notice. A sudden gathering of crows on a roofline. A bird calling at the wrong hour. A hush that falls over a road as if the air has thickened. The washing woman at the ford grows more prominent in later memory. She becomes the image people carry when they speak of death approaching, not in terror, but in recognition. The old woman kneeling, rinsing cloth, the sound of water over stone, the feeling that the world has turned a page. Sometimes she is not called the Morrigan at all. Sometimes she is simply the washer at the ford, or a figure like the Bean Sidhe, the woman of the mounds, the one who mourns and warns. It is difficult to trace clean lines between these figures. Folklore blends. Names shift. Roles merge. It is debated, and we should be gentle about certainty. But the emotional inheritance is clear. The Morrigan becomes the way a culture speaks about fate when it no longer uses the language of gods. Instead of divine counsels, there are omens. Instead of battlefield speeches, there are dreams. Instead of a goddess standing with a spear, there is a crow on a branch, watching. And yet, the motifs remain. Water. Boundary. The thin place. The sense that a life can be weighed. I like to imagine a later era. A small village near a river. A person waking in the night and hearing a bird call once. Then silence. The next day, someone falls ill. Or a traveler does not return. Or a family receives news that changes the shape of their future. The story would not say, "The Morrigan did this." It would say, "A crow came." It would say, "The washer was seen at the ford." It would say, "The river sounded different." This is how myth survives. It becomes atmosphere. It becomes pattern. It becomes a way of naming what humans cannot control. And that is why, even now, she can feel close, because she represents the truth that the world turns. That power rises and falls. That bravery does not guarantee safety, and that being warned does not always mean being saved. Yet she also represents something quieter. That being warned can mean being prepared. That knowing the cycle can soften panic. That if you can accept impermanence, you can stop clenching your mind like a fist. So let the story settle in you like dust settling on an old book. Not depressing dust, just the dust of time. The proof that something has lasted long enough to gather a layer of quiet. In Part 5, if you choose to continue, we can follow her deeper into her transformations. The crow above a battlefield, the wolf at the edge of a forest, the hag at the river, the sovereign test at a doorway. We can also return to the heroes, to Kuchulain again, and trace how prophecy and pride weave together until the end becomes unavoidable. Not because the goddess is cruel, but because the cycle demands its cost. For now, let the river keep breathing. Let the candlelight be soft. Let your thoughts loosen their grip. There is another strand here that is easy to miss if we only think of her as a battle figure. She binds. In the Irish heroic world, there are geasa, sacred obligations and prohibitions that cling to a person like invisible thread. A hero might be forbidden to refuse hospitality, or bound to accept a challenge offered in a certain way, or compelled to eat what is offered, even when it is dangerous. These geasa are not merely rules. They are fate made personal. They are the way destiny enters daily life, not as thunder, but as etiquette. The Morrigan's prophecies often feel like geasa in disguise, a warning that is also a tether, a word that settles on the listener and changes what choices remain possible. Sometimes the hero resists. Sometimes he laughs. Sometimes he thinks he is free because he does not believe. But the thread is still there, and time tightens it, gently, until it holds. This is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to explain a feeling you may already know. You know that feeling when you make one small decision, and later you realize that everything afterward was shaped by it, not because someone forced you, but because the world has consequences. That is the mythic logic of geasa. The Morrigan is the one who understands that logic best. She does not have to shove. She only has to point, and the road will carry you where it always led. And there is also the battle frenzy, the Rheastrad, that appears in the tales around heroes like Cuchulainn, a kind of divine storm inside a human body. It is described in wild, exaggerated imagery in the old texts, and we do not need to hold the images too tightly. The core idea is enough a warrior becomes more than himself for a time, as if touched by something that burns away hesitation and leaves only focus. Some traditions link such states to the influence of war deities. In the Morrigan's presence, courage can become a force as real as weather. But even that force has a price. After the frenzy, there is exhaustion. After the clarity, there is quiet. The body remembers it is mortal. The mind returns to ordinary speed. And the river keeps moving, steady and indifferent, carrying away the heat of the moment. This is why the Morrigan's guidance is never only about winning. It is about surviving what winning costs. The Morrigan does not need you to fear her. She only asks that you see her, briefly, the way you see a shadow pass over water, and then let it go and drift onward. The room is warmer now, not because the night has softened, but because you have been listening for a while, and the mind, when it trusts a voice, stops bracing itself. Listen to the fire for a second. It does not roar. It makes a low, steady conversation, like old wood remembering the tree it came from. The candlelight adds a smaller, patient shimmer, and in that glow, even darker stories can feel safe enough to hold. In the last part, we stood at Mag Tuired and felt the Morrigan widen into prophecy, into history, into the long cycle of rise and decline. Now, we drift back toward the more intimate strand again, the one where a god meets a single person and the whole myth becomes close enough to touch. Because the Morrigan does not only judge kingdoms, she also tests the one who thinks he can stand alone against a whole army. And in Irish memory, that one is Cuchulainn. He is the young champion of Ulster, the hound of the ford, the defender left standing when a curse weakens the rest of his people. The setting is the great cattle raid, the Táin, when Queen Medb gathers her forces and comes for a prize that is both practical and symbolic. Cattle as wealth, cattle as status, cattle as the measure of a realm's prosperity. The land is wet with tension. The roads carry more footsteps than they should. Herds low in the distance. Smoke rising from camps. And always, somewhere at the edge of hearing, birds. The Morrigan notices imbalance. She notices when a single figure is holding back a tide. Extreme circumstances draw her the way cold, draws breath out of a mouth, visible and undeniable. She comes to Cuchulainn first in a form meant to be persuasive. A young woman, a maiden of such bright presence that even a weary warrior might pause, not from desire alone, but from that deeper instinct that recognizes something not ordinary. Her beauty is described in the tales as shifting, as if the light cannot settle on her face in one final way. Her clothing is rich. Her voice carries ease, like someone used to being obeyed. She offers him alliance, and not only alliance, but the kind that comes with promises of cattle, land, victory, and protection. She offers herself, yes, but she is also offering the shortcut, the easy path, the magical solution that would spare his body some of its burden. And Cuchulainn refuses. He does not refuse gently. He refuses with the bluntness of a person who has no spare patience for distraction, and with the pride of someone who believes his own strength is enough. He says he has no time. He is guarding a ford. He is doing his duty. He does not need a woman's company. His refusal is not only about the offer. It is about control. He does not want to owe anyone, not even a goddess. It is important to say this softly, because the story does not ask us to despise him. It asks us to recognize something human. The need to believe you can do it alone. The need to prove yourself by refusing help, even when help is offered for reasons you do not yet understand. The Morrigan does not shout. She does not beg. She does something colder. She warns him. Her warning is not a threat in the childish sense. It is prophecy, a statement of pattern, a reminder that the road he is walking has a bend that ends in shadow. Then she changes. The transformation is described as fluid, as if her body is made of water and can rearrange itself without breaking. The maiden's limbs become wings. The brightness dims into black. She becomes a crow, larger than an ordinary bird, with eyes that feel like they have been watching battle for longer than your mind can count. From a branch, she speaks again, and her voice is harsher now, but the meaning is the same. You will be wounded. You will be tested. You will not escape what is waiting. Cuchulainn answers her with defiance. He says he will face it. He says he will not bend. He says no prophecy can make him smaller. And in that exchange, something tightens. A thread. A gaze, not always spoken as a formal rule, but felt as an obligation created by the meeting itself. From this point forward, the goddess is part of his story, whether he wants her or not. The raid continues. The single combats, the exhaustion that builds slowly, like silt building in a river, until the current has to fight harder to move. This is when the Morrigan returns, and she returns in a form that changes the entire emotional texture. She comes as an old woman, a hag, bent and slow, the kind of figure people overlook without thinking, the kind that makes you glance away out of discomfort and then feel a small sting of guilt for doing so. Her clothes are plain. Her hands look tired. She moves as if each step costs something. She approaches Cuchulainn when he has a brief moment to breathe, when he is pulled back from the ford to tend small wounds, to tighten straps, to swallow air and swallow fatigue. The old woman carries milk, or offers milk from a cow she claims to have saved. She asks nothing grand, only that he drink, that he accept nourishment. And he does. He drinks because his body needs it. He drinks because he has been taught to respect elders, to accept hospitality. The milk is not ordinary. It restores him more quickly than it should. The ache in his limbs dulls. His focus sharpens. He feels the strange relief of being patched, just enough to continue. And then the old woman straightens. Age falls away like a cloak unfastening. The bent spine becomes strong. The plain face becomes terrible with beauty and depth. The eyes become the eyes of the Morrigan. He realizes what he has taken. He has accepted her gift. He has received her assistance, even if he did not ask. And in accepting it, he has allowed a bond to form. It is not romantic. It is not friendship. It is something more complicated. A tether, a reminder that even the proud must sometimes drink what the world offers. The Morrigan speaks to him, and there is something almost tender in her tone, though it is a tenderness without softness. She is not coddling him. She is revealing a truth. You can refuse me with words, she seems to say, but your body still needs water, still needs milk, still needs rest. Mortality is a kind of agreement you cannot break. Cuchulainn is unsettled. He does not like owing. He does not like being caught. And so, when she returns again, She does not return as a woman at all. She becomes the red heifer. The color matters. In Celtic tradition, red animals often carry otherworld significance. They look like they belong to the land, and yet their brightness feels like a message, like a flare in fog. The heifer charges through the field, and the chaos it creates is not random. It breaks formations. It turns a controlled movement into scattered reactions. Warriors dodge, trip, lose sight of each other. The ground becomes a puzzle under their feet. Cuchulainn is forced to react, not with heroic speeches, but with practical movement, stepping aside, pivoting, reading the rhythm of a creature that is both animal and divine. He strikes to stop it, and when he does, he injures the heifer. Not in a way we need to linger on, only enough to mark the pattern he harms the goddess in that form. The Morrigan does not collapse into tragedy. She absorbs the moment as data. He can be drawn into harming what he does not fully understand. Later, she appears again, this time in water. It is one of those moments where the story feels especially close to sleep, because water has a way of making everything slow. Cuchulainn must cross a river. The current is swollen, the stones slick. His gear is heavy. The air is cold. Each step is a careful negotiation with gravity. And in the river, the Morrigan becomes an eel. An eel is not glamorous. It is quick, muscular, hard to grasp. It can wrap. It can pull. It can turn a simple crossing into panic. She coils around his legs and tries to drag him down. The danger is not only drowning. It is the loss of footing. The sudden helplessness of being caught in a place where your usual strength has no leverage. Cuchulainn fights in the water, and the story lingers on his adaptability. Not his brutality, his adaptability. He stops wasting energy. He learns the current. He angles his body. He lets the river help him instead of opposing it. He uses the shallows when he can. He moves toward the bank, toward friction, toward ground. He survives the eel. And again, he harms the goddess in that form. Enough to mark another thread. He is refusing her, not only in words now, but in action. Again and again, even when she comes as something not human. Then comes the wolf. A gray wolf emerges at the edge of a fight when he is already engaged. The timing is deliberate. The wolf is not only another opponent. It is a test of attention. A test of whether he can stay coherent when the world becomes multiple. The wolf moves with intelligence. It coordinates with his human opponent. It tries to catch his legs, to pull him off balance at the exact moment he raises his guard elsewhere. This is how panic is manufactured. Not by screaming, but by dividing focus until something slips. Cuchulainn responds by simplifying. He controls position. He makes sure both threats stay in front of him. He does not let them split his awareness. He uses movement like a shield. He survives the wolf. And again, he injures the goddess in that form. Do you see the pattern he refuses her offers? He takes her aid by accident. He fights her when she becomes obstacle. He leaves marks on her shapes, and her shapes leave marks on his fate. This is not a clean rivalry. It is an entanglement. And the story has one more quiet twist that I always find strange. After these encounters, the Morrigan appears again, not as crow or cow or eel or wolf, but as a woman with a simple task. She comes to him as a healer. Or rather, she comes as a woman who looks like a healer, a woman offering him drink, offering him help, and the drink corresponds to the forms he injured. He meets an old woman milking a cow, or offering a cup. He accepts, because the code of hospitality is strong, and because he is still human and still tired. As he drinks, he unknowingly heals her injuries, the injuries he caused in her animal forms. The milk cures the wound he gave the heifer. The drink helps the eel. The offering heals the wolf. The details vary by telling, but the meaning is consistent. His own hands, his own mouth, his own need for sustenance becomes the mechanism of repairing the goddess he fought. Now, let us drift toward the ford again, because the ford is where her most haunting image waits. The washing woman. There are stories of the Morrigan, or a figure closely linked with her, appearing by rivers at night, washing armor and weapons. The water is cold. The stones are dark. The cloth slaps softly against metal. The sound is small, but it lands in the mind like a bell. To see her is to be warned. The gear she washes belongs to someone whose death is near. The ford is a doorway. The living cross it to keep going. The dead cross another way. The washing is not gore. It is not spectacle. It is preparation. It is ritual. It is the world acknowledging that an ending is coming and making it as clean as it can. I want you to imagine this scene gently, without fear. A river under moonlight, mist on the surface like breath. A woman kneeling, her sleeves dark with water, her hair loose, catching a little silver. Her hands moving with practiced rhythm, as if she has done this 1,000 times, as if she will do it 1,000 more. She lifts a piece of armor, turns it, dips it, rubs at a stain that might be only dust. She wrings cloth. Water streams back into the river. The river accepts it without comment. If a warrior approaches, the story says, the reaction matters. Respect opens a door. Arrogance closes it. Some who approach receive warning, not to avoid death, but to face it properly, to put affairs in order, to speak the right words, to carry honor in the last moments. Those who mock, who demand to be spared, who treat her as a servant, find no mercy, because mercy is not her job in that moment. Balance is. This image is why, long after people stopped telling detailed stories of divine councils, they still told stories of a woman washing at a ford. It is the simplest omen. A person doing a task. Water moving. A future tightening into certainty. And now, as the fire softens further and the room grows quieter, I want to end this part the way the myths often end their scenes. Not with a slam, but with a turning. Cuchu Lane continues to fight through the cattle raid, holding the line with a body that is slowly becoming a ledger of fatigue. The Morrigan stays near him, sometimes visible, sometimes only felt, like a shadow passing over water, and somewhere ahead, not yet reached, there is the final shape of his story. The web of Gisa tightening, the pride and the duty pressing against each other until something gives. We will go there next. For now, let the river keep its steady breath. Let the candlelight loosen the corners of the room. Let the dust of old stories settle gently on your thoughts. Not heavy, not suffocating, just quiet evidence that you have been somewhere ancient and are returning slowly, step by step, toward sleep. The fire has settled into a quieter phase, a soft orange breathing behind the grate. If you listen closely, you can hear tiny shifts in the wood as it gives itself up, not with drama, but with steady surrender. I always think myths work like that. They do not explode all at once. They burn slowly, shaping the room with heat you barely notice until you realize your shoulders have dropped. So let us stay in that slow warmth and step back into Ireland, where the river keeps moving, dark and patient, and the Morrigan keeps watch. The old stories say that after the cattle raid, after the shouting and the marching and the long line of single combats, a deeper pattern remains underneath the visible conflict. It is not only about one brave young man. It is about the pressure that heroism places on a human body. It is about the way reputation becomes a trap. It is about fate, not as a single moment, but as a tightening weave made of small choices, small refusals, small obligations accepted without noticing. In Irish thought, one of the clearest ways to speak about that weave is the idea of geasa. A geas is like a sacred condition, a vow, a prohibition, a rule that binds a person to a certain path. Sometimes it is spoken aloud by a druid or a goddess. Sometimes it is inherited. Sometimes it is created by an exchange of hospitality or a promise made in a half moment. It can sound strange to modern ears, but if you have ever felt bound by something you said years ago, bound by a promise you cannot break without becoming someone you do not want to be, then you understand it already. A geis is the mythic name for that feeling. Cuchulainn lives inside a web of them, and the Morrigan, as an arbiter of fate, moves near those threads. This is why her appearances by rivers matter so much. Water is where rules bend. Water is where boundaries soften. Water is where a person can be both in the world and half out of it, listening to something older than their own plans. When the Morrigan appears as the washing woman, she is not only foretelling death, she is acknowledging the final tightening of the weave. Some versions of the tradition describe her washing the weapons of the doomed at a ford. Others speak of a related figure, but the emotional logic is shared. There is a moment when the world begins preparing for a life to be completed, and the preparation is gentle, even if the outcome is not. Picture it again, softly. The water is cold. The night air smells like wet stone and leaf mold. A candle in a lantern, maybe, or a small fire in the distance, gives the river a thin ribbon of light. The washing woman kneels. She lifts a spear. She rinses it. The cloth makes a quiet sound against wood and metal. She lays it down on a flat stone. She takes it up again. She repeats. Each motion is calm. There is no hurry. In that calm, the warning lands harder. Because nothing is hurried unless it is trying to hide fear. The Morrigan does not hide fear. She carries knowledge. This is why, in so many Celtic stories, death is not merely a collapse. It is a passage supervised by someone who understands the roads between worlds. That is her role as a psychop, not a grim jailer, not a cruel collector. A guide. A guide can still be frightening, but not because the guide wants to harm you. A guide is frightening because the guide knows where the path ends and you do not. Now, the myths do not always describe the Celtic otherworld as a single place. There are islands, tolls, fields, mists, and shifting distances. There are realms where time does not move the way it does here. There are stories of feasts and music and long rest. There are also stories that warn against dishonor, against betrayal, against breaking sacred obligations. The Morrigan's judgment is not about punishing small mistakes. It is about maintaining balance. Warriors who lived by certain codes, who died in defense of their people, were believed to cross differently than those who died in selfishness or treachery. Even if the exact geography is debated, the principle is clear. A life has weight. A death is not random in meaning. A soul's passage is shaped by what it carried. When Q Chulainn is nearing his own end in later tradition, the Morrigan appears again, and her presence has a quiet inevitability to it. She is not trying to seduce him now. She is not testing his pride with a clever disguise. She is present the way a storm front is present on the horizon, already arranged. Some tellings place her as a crow watching from a branch. Some place her as the voice in the river wind. Some place her as the washing woman whose work has been completed. Always, the message is the same. Your story has been written into the land now. Your body will not keep up with your fame forever. Your obligations will pull in different directions until the pull becomes too much. And here is where the Morrigan becomes even more than a battle goddess. She becomes a sovereignty force. Because in Celtic imagination, kingship and land are married. Not always literally, but symbolically, the ruler's health is tied to the realm's health. The fertility of fields, the steadiness of borders, the peace between families, all of it depends on whether the bond is respected. A sovereignty goddess tests that bond. She appears in disguise to see whether a potential ruler has generosity, whether he knows how to treat the old and the poor, whether he can accept responsibility without turning it into entitlement. This is one of the reasons the Morrigan has more than one face. As bad, she is the battle crow, the prophecy in the air over conflict. As Masha, she is the land's authority, the one who measures rulers against the sacred contract. As Nemain, she is the panic, the internal battle, the trembling inside decisions. Different names, different currents, one river. There is another scene that belongs here, not because it is loud, but because it explains why her darkness is never only darkness. It is the meeting with the Dagda, once each year, when Samhain arrives and the year turns its face toward winter. The stories place the Morrigan on the bank of a river, waiting. The river has many names in different tellings, but the feeling is constant water as boundary, water as invitation, water as witness. The Dagda comes to her, large as the earth's patience, carrying the weight of harvest, of protection, of a god who feeds and guards. Their meeting is not spoken of in the language of romance the way later tales might do it. It is spoken of as a ritual of balance. If you imagine it gently, you can see why. The grass is damp. The sky is low. The air tastes of smoke from hearths and the first hint of decay in fallen leaves. Their footsteps leave prints that fill with water. The river moves past them, dark and steady, carrying little pieces of clay from upstream, carrying the memory of storms. They join in that liminal place, and the joining is said to send strength through the land. Not only fertility, not only crops, but the harder kind of strength that helps people endure the cold months without turning cruel. It is a reminder that the Morrigan is not only the crow above a battlefield, she is also the force that renews the ground after battle. She is the hand that closes the wound of a year so the next year can begin. This is why her prophecies can feel severe and still be protective. She is not trying to end the world. She is trying to keep it from rotting. If you were standing here with me, beside this imaginary fire, I would tell you that this threefold nature always felt like a psychological map. Because people are like that too. We are not one thing. We are the person who wants to be brave, and the person who wants to be safe, and the person who is suddenly afraid for reasons we cannot explain. The Morrigan does not create those contradictions. She reveals them. She amplifies them when the moment is important. That is why she appears to heroes at crossroads. And why, when she appears, the encounter often begins as something small. A request, a cup of milk, a bird in the hedge, a shadow on water. And then, later, the person realizes the whole meeting was a test. In the stories, Cu Chulainn resists the test because he is built to resist. His greatness is tied to his refusal to be controlled. He does not want a goddess as an ally if the alliance will make him dependent. At the same time, his greatness also depends on hospitality, on accepting food and drink, on respecting elders, on keeping his word. These virtues collide. A guise can create the collision. One obligation says, never refuse food offered by a woman. Another obligation says, never eat the meat of a certain animal. One obligation says, accept challenges. Another says, protect your people above your own life. Eventually, the world can put a person in a position where obeying one breaks another. That is tragedy, in the oldest sense. Not gore, not shock, just the slow impossibility of choosing a path that does not hurt someone. The Morrigan stands near that impossibility, not because she delights in suffering, but because she represents the cosmic reality that choices have consequences even when every choice is heavy. And she also represents the idea that destruction has a purpose. This can sound harsh, so let me say it softly. In the Celtic cycle of growth and decay, a kingdom that becomes corrupt is like a field that has been overworked. If it is never allowed to rest, if it is forced to produce without pause, it becomes barren. So the cycle includes collapse, not as punishment, but as reset, not as cruelty, but as clearing space. The Morrigan, in the stories, knows when a ruler has outlived his bond with the land. She knows when a hero's pride has become dangerous. She knows when a society is drifting toward moral rot. The slow replacing of courage with manipulation. The slow replacing of duty with selfish appetite. Her prophecy after Mag Two Wired speaks of a future where honor fades, where the old rituals become empty, where people keep the shapes of wisdom but forget its substance. Some scholars read this as mythic commentary on real historical change, on invasion, on new religions, on social transformation. It is debated, and we cannot be sure how much is memory and how much is poetic warning. But the feeling of it is familiar. Every culture feels the fear that its best days are behind it. Every culture fears forgetting. So the Morrigan becomes a kind of voice that refuses forgetfulness. Even when her voice comes as a crow. Even when it comes as a washing woman at midnight. Even when it comes as a dream. And this is how her story continues after the gods retreat. In later Ireland, as Christianity spreads and the old divine names become more dangerous to speak openly, the Morrigan changes shape in the stories, the way she always has. She becomes omen rather than deity. She becomes the strange woman at the ford. She becomes the crow that will not leave. She becomes the whisper that tells a king he is losing the land. Her power does not vanish. It relocates. It moves from the temple into the hedge, from the official feast into the solitary dream, from the public ritual into the private shiver that makes a person reconsider a choice. This is one of the reasons I find her so enduring. Honestly, it is hard to fully forget a goddess who specializes in being hard to categorize. War, yes, but also prophecy. Death, yes, but also renewal. Fear, yes, but also clarity. And that clarity is what we will need in the next part. Because the Morrigan story does not stop at testing heroes or predicting decline. It moves into the deep craft of influence, how she uses symbols, animals, rivers, and the laws of hospitality to steer human decisions. How she can bless a ruler with prosperity or strip a crown away without lifting a sword. How her threefold presence becomes a mirror for the listener, showing what part of you wants to fight, what part wants to rule, what part simply wants to survive. So, as you settle deeper, let me leave you with a final quiet image. A river at night, mist rising like slow breath, a few stones in the shallows, dark and slick. On the far bank, a line of trees, and in those trees, a crow that seems too still. Nothing is happening, and yet everything is waiting. The fire beside you keeps murmuring. The candlelight keeps its small circle. And the old story, patient as water, carries us toward the next turning, where the Morrigan's tests become even more subtle, and the boundaries between fate and choice grow thin enough to feel on your skin. And if your thoughts wander, that is fine. Let them drift like ash that lifts and settles again. The story will still be here when you return, sitting quietly in the warm dark, like a figure by a river who has all night to wait. The night has that deep quiet now, the kind that makes even your own breathing feel like a small ceremony. If you were sitting here with me, you would hear the fire's smallest sounds, not the crackle, but the softer shifts. A twig settling, a coal turning a little brighter, then dimming again. Candles' smoke threads upward in a thin ribbon, and in that ribbon, I like to imagine all the old stories rising, not to haunt, but to hover, to linger, to remind. This is where the Morrigan becomes almost invisible. Not weaker, just quieter. Because once you understand her as a force of sovereignty and fate, you begin to notice that she rarely needs to strike. She prefers to arrange. She prefers to tilt a moment by a finger's width until the whole thing slides where it was already going. This is what makes her frightening, in the most gentle way. There is no jump scare in her myth. There is simply the realization that the world has rules, and the rules are older than pride. Think of a king walking along a riverbank at dawn. The grass is silver with frost. His boots dampen quickly. His cloak gathers little beads of water that never quite fall. He is not thinking about gods. He is thinking about taxes, borders, the next dispute, the next marriage alliance, the next harvest. And then, on the path, he meets a woman. Sometimes she is old, sometimes young, sometimes she is plain, sometimes unsettlingly beautiful. Sometimes she is carrying a bundle of sticks. Sometimes she is stirring water with a branch. The scene can change, but the question beneath it stays the same. How will you treat what you believe is small? Will you offer help? Will you give food? Will you speak gently? Will you keep your temper? Will you hold the sacred relationship between yourself and the land in Celtic tradition? Sovereignty is not only a crown, it is a contract. The land gives abundance if the ruler gives justice. The land withholds if the ruler becomes selfish or cruel. The Morrigan, in her sovereignty aspect, is the one who checks the contract. She does not do it in a courtroom. She does it in moments of private behavior when no one is watching. When the mask drops, when a person reveals what they truly are. This is why she appears in disguise so often. Disguise is not trickery for entertainment. It is a tool for truth. If you think about it, this is how life tests us too. Not with obvious banners that say, "This is your moral exam," but with small, ordinary opportunities that are easy to dismiss. A tired stranger, a hungry animal, an old person asking for time. In the tales, a ruler who fails those tests does not always fall immediately. That would be too simple. Instead, the consequences arrive like weather. Slowly, predictably, unavoidable once the season has turned. A year of poor crops, a flood that breaks a familiar bank, a feud that grows teeth, a sickness that moves through a hall despite the best prayers. You might tell yourself it is coincidence. You might tell yourself the gods have nothing to do with it. But the Morrigan's logic is not about punishment. It is about balance. A king out of balance produces a land out of balance. A leader who breaks faith creates fractures that spread. This is the kind of dark story you can hold while falling asleep because it is not about gore. It is about consequence. And consequence is one of the most calming truths there is. Not pleasant, always, but calming. It reminds you the world is not random. It has shape. The Morrigan also shapes by sound. We think of her as the crow above the battlefield, the cry that curdles confidence, the presence that makes a warrior glance upward and suddenly remember mortality. But she also shapes by quieter sounds. The slap of cloth against metal at a ford, the low rustle of wings in a hedge, the river's steady breath under moonlight. These are her instruments. And as the centuries pass, as the Tuatha De Danann withdraw deeper into the other world, the Morrigan's instruments become even subtler. People stop meeting gods directly in broad daylight. The world grows more crowded with churches, laws, records, and ink. The old names become harder to speak. Some are softened, some are hidden. Some are pressed into folklore, like herbs pressed between pages. But the Morrigan remains, because she is built for shifting. She becomes the omen woman. She becomes the washing woman. She becomes, in some strands, close to the banshee, the keening presence near death. It is debated how directly these traditions connect, and we cannot be sure how much is the same figure and how much is the same feeling wearing different names. Still, the emotional truth is unmistakable. Ireland keeps a memory of a feminine force by water, associated with fate, war, and the last turning. In later tellings, a person might hear a cry outside a house at night, a thin sound, like wind through reeds, but with a human edge. The hair on the arms lifts. The room feels colder. The listener knows, without a messenger, that someone's story is nearing its final page. This is not only fear, it is also preparation. The Morrigan's presence teaches preparation. She teaches that the world changes whether you want it to or not, so you may as well meet the change awake, with your shoulders relaxed rather than clenched. She teaches that endings do not erase meanings, they complete them. Even in her most warlike aspect, she is a completer, a finisher, a closer of cycles. Now, let's return briefly to Cuchulainn, because he is the clearest example of what happens when a person refuses the goddess who administers these cycles. He does not refuse because he is evil. He refuses because he is proud and young and sincere in his devotion to duty. He believes that accepting divine help would cheapen his heroism. He believes that a life should be a straight line drawn by one hand, his own. But his story demonstrates the tragedy of Geasa. The more obligations you carry, the more likely you are to reach a moment when the obligations collide. The more legendary you become, the more the world uses you as a hinge. The more you are asked to act as if you are larger than human, even though your body is still bone and blood and breath. The Morrigan understands this. She stands close enough to see it from the start. She tests him not to destroy him early, but to measure what kind of hero he is, and to set the terms of how his fame will be remembered. In some versions, she admires him. In some, she resents him. Most likely, she feels something that does not fit cleanly into either box. Because the Morrigan is not a simple villain. She is a force that sees the whole board. She knows that if Cuchulainn were allowed to live forever, Ireland would become dependent on one champion. And dependence is a form of weakness. Heroes must die so that communities learn to stand. It is harsh, but it is how myth explains maturity. So the Morrigan's work is not to crush him. It is to make sure his end comes at the right time, in the right shape. So the cycle continues. That is the dark part. And the soothing part is this: the cycle continuing means nothing is wasted. In the old worldview, even decline has meaning. It clears a field. It makes space. It teaches humility. It invites renewal. This is why the Morrigan's prophecies after Mag toured are so heavy, and yet so strangely steady. She foresees a future where virtue thins, where cleverness replaces honor, where sacred duties become paperwork, where people forget the deep reasons for their rituals. She does not say this to make you despair. She says it to remind you that forgetting is part of the cycle, and remembering can be chosen. If you were standing with me in a museum hush, walking between glass cases that hold old spearheads and brooches, you would see how memory behaves. Objects survive. Names blur. Meanings shift. What stays is the feeling. And the Morrigan is a feeling that keeps returning, the feeling that power must answer to something beyond itself. A king answers to the land. A warrior answers to honor. A person answers to the promises they made in the quiet when no one was watching. This is her lesson, spoken softly. Now let the story slow even more. Picture a long Irish road at dusk. The sky is low, rain threatening, not falling yet. A traveler's footsteps make dull sounds on wet earth. In the ditch, water gathers. A small stream runs alongside the path, carrying silt. The traveler's cloak is heavy. The traveler's mind is tired. Not frightened, just tired. A crow watches from a fence post. It does not scream. It simply watches. The traveler reaches a ford. The water is shallow, but cold. Stones show through the surface. The current slides around ankles. On the far side, there is a figure kneeling. A woman washing something in the water. The traveler cannot see what it is, not clearly. A piece of cloth. A piece of metal. A piece of the past. The traveler pauses. Breath slows. The mind, already half drifting toward sleep, accepts the moment as a dream, as an omen, as a reminder. And the woman does not look up right away. She keeps washing. In that small delay is the whole mood of the Morrigan. Fate does not rush. It does not chase you with a knife. It waits. It works. It finishes what it began. Some scholars argue that when a culture changes, its old gods do not vanish. They thin out, like smoke after a fire, until you only notice them when the light hits at the right angle. We cannot be sure how direct the line is between the Morrigan and later figures like the washing woman or the keening presence near death, but the feeling is hard to miss. Ireland keeps a memory of a feminine force by water, near thresholds, near endings, and thresholds matter to her. A ford is not only a place to cross. It is where you slow down. It is where you test the ground with your foot. It is where you admit the current has a say. That is the Morrigan's way. She does not need to roar to be powerful. She needs only to make you pause. If you were standing a little closer, You might notice how her tests are almost always small at first. A ruler, hungry and impatient, meets an old woman on the roadside. She asks for a bite of bread. The ruler's hand hovers over his pouch. That hovering matters. In that pause, the whole kingdom is present in miniature. Will he give without humiliation? Will he take without gratitude? Will he speak as if the land itself is listening? Or a warrior, before a duel, hears wings moving in the hedge? He looks up just once. His throat tightens. He remembers that bravery is not a feeling of invincibility. It is a choice made with trembling hands. He steps forward anyway, and the choice becomes his offering. Those tiny moments are how the Morrigan writes history. Not with a pen, but with attention. She makes a person aware of the weight of their own actions, and that awareness, once it arrives, is difficult to unlearn. Honestly, that is one of the gentlest things a dark goddess can do. She does not force you to suffer needlessly. She forces you to see clearly, and then you decide what to do with the sight. So let the story slow one last time. Picture a narrow road at dusk. The sky is low and soft. Your footsteps are steady, not hurried. A stream runs beside the path, carrying silt and tiny leaves. The sound, like a quiet shushing. Somewhere ahead, a crow watches from a fence post. It does not cry. It simply turns its head, as if it is counting you, not to judge, but to remember. You reach the ford. The water slides around stones and touches your ankles with cold honesty. On the far bank, a figure kneels, washing something you cannot quite name. Cloth. Metal. The past. She keeps washing, unbothered by your presence, as if time itself is a garment being rinsed clean. You stop. You breathe. Your mind, already loosening, accepts the moment as a dream. And the woman does not look up right away. In that small delay is the whole mood of the Morrigan. Fate does not rush. It waits. It works. It finishes what it began. In the next and final part, we will let her finish the shape of her story. Not with violence, but with quiet closure. Not with terror, but with stillness. The river will keep breathing. The candlelight will keep its circle. And the Morrigan, threefold and patient, will settle into the last lesson she offers a listener at night. Before we enter the final part, take a slow breath in and let it out, as if you are exhaling a thought you no longer need. The fire is lower now. The candle has shortened. The room feels closer, like the dark has leaned in, not to threaten, but to shelter. This is the hour when myths become most gentle, because the mind has stopped trying to solve them. It is enough to feel them. The Morrigan, at the end of her story, is not a bird shrieking over corpses. She is not a monster in a field. She is not even only a queen of battle. She is the quiet certainty that everything changes, and that change has a rhythm. If you have ever watched a river long enough, you know what I mean. At first you notice the surface, the glints, the moving reflections, the little ripples that seem like they must be important. Then you stare longer, and the surface becomes less interesting. you begin to feel the current underneath. The steady pull. The direction that does not argue. The Morrigan is like that current. Before we go back to the ford, let me tell you something I have always found strange, in the best way. The Morrigan does not ask to be loved. Many gods, in many traditions, want devotion. They want hymns, temples, offerings, a constant gaze turned upward. The Morrigan's myths feel different. She seems to want recognition, not romance. She wants you to see the structure beneath events. She wants you to notice that victory is never only strength. It is timing, alignment, and the willingness to pay a price. She wants you to notice that a kingdom is not only walls and warriors. It is how the powerful treat the powerless when nobody is keeping score. This is why she can feel colder than other deities, and yet also more honest. Honestly, I find that kind of honesty oddly soothing at night, when the mind is tired of pretending. And there is another softness in her that is easy to miss. She understands that humans are not built for constant war. The stories celebrate courage, yes, but they also admit exhaustion. They admit that even the greatest hero will be wounded, will need milk, will need rest, will need a moment beside a river to breathe. That admission is the closest thing to mercy you will find in a war goddess, and it is real. In some tellings, after Cuchulainn's final stand, the Morrigan is not gloating. She is simply present, as if she is closing a book and placing it gently back on a shelf. That image stays with me. A shelf, a book, dust settling. No cheering, no triumph, just completion. Now, think again of the sacred marriage by the river. The Morrigan and the Dagda meeting at Samhain, when the year itself turns and the veil is thin. The riverbank would be cold, even if the day had been mild. The ground would be slick with fallen leaves. The air would carry the smell of peat smoke from distant fires where humans are already beginning their own rituals, not knowing, perhaps, that the gods are performing a larger ritual at the same moment. The Dagda arrives like the earth itself arriving. Heavy steps. A presence that makes trees feel sturdier. The Morrigan arrives like a change in weather. A shift in pressure. A sudden stillness in birdsong. Their union is not described like a human romance in the oldest layers. It feels more like an agreement between forces. Fertility and warfare. Protection and destruction. Growth and cutting back. The land needs both. If there is any sweetness in it, it is the sweetness of necessity, the relief of two powers aligning so the world can continue. After that alignment, battles can be fought with meaning, not only chaos. Crops can grow even after blood has soaked soil, not because blood is good, but because the cycle is stubbornly generous. This is the Celtic logic of renewal. Harsh, yes, but also deeply committed to continuation. And this is why the Morrigan's prophecy after victory is not only celebration. It includes warning, because a people who forget the contract will eventually suffer the land's withdrawal. Not out of spite, but out of balance. In modern language, we might call it ecological truth. You do not have to believe in a goddess to see how land responds to exploitation. The myth simply gives that truth a face you can speak to, a voice you can hear, a crow you can notice. Some scholars argue that is the true genius of her tradition. It makes responsibility feel personal. Now, let's return to your own body for a moment. Notice the weight of your hands. Notice how your fingers rest when you do not force them. Notice the softness behind your eyes. There is nothing you have to prove to anyone in this room. No battle. No crown. No test. Just breath. And if your mind drifts to old fears, to old conflicts, let the Morrigan hold them. Let her be the witness so you do not have to relive them. She has watched worse. She has watched longer. She does not flinch. She simply keeps the river moving. In the beginning of her myths, she is dramatic because the world is being established. Kingdoms are still raw. Divine races still fight for the right to shape Ireland's spiritual geography. Chaos still has fresh teeth, so she appears with storms, with fog, with battle cries, with prophecies spoken aloud. She stands in triad, a threefold gaze on the same battlefield. Bad, the crow, watching the moment of death. Masha, the sovereignty pulse, measuring rulers against the land. Numain, the panic shadow, testing whether the mind can hold steady when everything shakes. But once those foundations are laid, once the Tuatha De Danann have done their great work and stepped back into the other world, her drama becomes internal. She becomes the voice in a choice. Not an audible voice. Not necessarily. More like that strange certainty that rises when you are about to do something dishonorable and you suddenly feel a heaviness, a hesitation, as if the world itself has noticed. Or that lighter feeling when you do the right thing quietly and nobody applauds, and yet something in you settles, like a stone sinking into its proper place. That is her continuing presence. And it is why she does not fade. A goddess who only rules. Battle fades when battle changes. A goddess who rules fate and sovereignty remains. Because people keep making choices, and leaders keep needing to be measured. So in later Ireland, when the old divine names are pushed into the background, the Morrigan survives as pattern. She survives as the woman at the ford. She survives as the crow that watches without blinking. She survives as the sudden sense, in a quiet house, that someone's life has reached its final turn. It can be tempting to make her only frightening, to treat her as a horror figure. But the old tradition does something more subtle. It treats her as the world's honesty. There is nothing sentimental in her. There is also, strangely, nothing petty. She does not punish because she is offended. She responds because the balance has been disturbed. She can bless because the bond has been respected. When a king keeps justice, the land thrives. When a king breaks faith, the land dries, floods, or fractures, and the people feel it in their bones. This is why the Morrigan's relationship to sovereignty is so deep. She is not only a judge of individual bravery, she is a guardian of the contract between human order and natural order. If you want an image for this, imagine a great hall at night. The benches are empty. The last cup has been set down. The rushes on the floor hold dust and footprints. Smoke from the hearth hangs under the rafters like a low ceiling. A king sits alone for a moment, not as a public figure, but as a tired person. Outside, rain begins. Not hard, just enough to tap at the roof. The sound is soothing. It makes even power feel small, and the king remembers, perhaps, that the land is older than his crown. He remembers the sacred obligation, not as a political speech, but as a feeling in the chest. That remembering is the blessing. In mythic language, it is the Morrigan's favor. Now, because we are finishing, I want to return once more to Cuchulainn, but only in the way a storyteller returns, softly, without forcing the image. Cuchulainn's later end is told in many versions, and the details vary, but the emotional core stays consistent. The web of obligations tightens. The hero is pulled between vows, between hospitality, between pride, between duty, until the path that would save him requires breaking faith with something sacred. So he chooses the path that keeps faith, even if it costs him. This is not a lesson about being reckless. It is a lesson about the weight of a life lived by oaths. The Morrigan's role in his end is not to stab him. It is to appear at the edge, often as a crow, to confirm what has already become inevitable. She is the witness. A witness is different from an executioner. A witness is the one who makes sure the story is recorded correctly in the deep memory of the land. And in Irish tradition, land remembers. Rivers remember, carrying silt that once touched battlefields. Stones remember, holding moss where footsteps once slipped. Trees remember, rings counting quiet years after loud ones. If you listen closely, even dust remembers. It settles on objects and makes them look older, more real, as if time has placed a hand on them. This is why I keep returning to the river motif. It is the perfect image for her. The river is life, because it carries water. The river is death, because it carries bodies, and because it erodes everything given enough time. The river is sovereignty, because whoever controls water controls fields, and whoever controls fields controls food, and whoever controls food controls people. To the river is prophecy, because it shows you what time does it moves, and it cannot be stopped, only guided. So, in this final part, let us do something simple. Let us walk, in imagination, to a ford. You are not hurried. Your steps are slow. The air is cool. The night smells of wet earth. A little smoke, a little leaf. Your clothes brush softly against your skin. Your fingers might be warm from the fire, but the air outside is different, and that contrast feels honest. You reach the water. It is shallow. It moves around stones with quiet insistence. The surface catches candlelight from the world behind you, and moonlight from the world above you, and it mixes them into a single trembling ribbon. On the far side, there is a figure, a woman, kneeling. She is washing something. You cannot tell what it is, and you do not need to know. The sound of cloth in water is enough. She does not look up immediately. She finishes the motion she is in the middle of. She rinses, wrings, lays the thing down. She draws water again. She repeats. Then, slowly, she raises her head. Her face is not one face. It is three possibilities held in one stillness. In the candle and moon mix, her eyes seem like the eyes of a crow for an instant, glossy and knowing. Then they seem like the eyes of a queen who understands land, who knows where boundaries should be. Then they seem like the eyes of fear itself, not panic, but the sharp awareness that you cannot lie to yourself forever. And in that moment, you understand what she is without needing a name. She is the part of reality that does not flatter. She is the part that does not forget. She is the part that keeps the cycle turning, so rot does not become permanent. Now, you might expect her to speak. Sometimes she does, in the old stories. Sometimes she gives warning. Sometimes she gives a single sentence that changes a life. But tonight, for sleep, she does not need many words. Her lesson can be delivered in silence. The silence says the river will keep moving. The silence says endings are not insults. They are completions. The silence says the land notices how you treat what is small. The silence says power does not excuse you from the contract. And then she lowers her gaze again and continues washing. The sound becomes steady. The mind relaxes. The body remembers that it is safe to let go. You step back from the ford, slowly, carefully, as if you do not want to disturb the water. Your footsteps soften in the grass. Behind you, the fire waits. The candle waits. The room waits. You return to the warmth, carrying only the calm part of the dark story, the part that says the world has rhythm, and within rhythm there is rest. Let your jaw loosen. Let your shoulders sink. Let your breathing find its own pace. If stray thoughts come, let them pass like birds crossing a dim sky. The Morrigan can keep watch without you. The river can keep breathing without you. The old oaths and old wars can settle into dust, into museum hush, into the quiet safety of distance. And you, here by the fire, can drift down through the soft layers of night until you reach the place where stories stop being words and become dream. Good night.